The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble plaza as Ben Carter stood frozen before the glass cathedral of corporate America. His calloused fingers traced the worn edges of his only tie. 9:52 a.m. glowed mockingly on his cracked watch face. 8 precious minutes to salvation. The crumpled eviction notice burned in his back pocket like a guilty secret. Then the world shattered. A woman's anguished scream echoed off polished stone, cutting through the pristine morning air like broken glass. Blood bloomed crimson against ivory silk as designer papers danced in the wind around her crumpled form. "Excuse me, do you need help?" The words escaped him, soft as a prayer, dangerous as a loaded gun. Time suspended itself between heartbeats as Ben Carter made the choice that would unravel everything he thought he knew about mercy, power, and the woman bleeding at his feet. Ben's worn sneakers pounded against marble as he sprinted toward the chaos. The woman's face was alabaster pale, framed by mahogany hair that had escaped its perfect arrangement. Her emerald eyes held pain that went deeper than physical injury. "I think my ankle's broken," she whispered, her voice carrying the refined cadence of someone accustomed to boardrooms, not parking lot disasters. Ben knelt beside her, his rough hands gentle as he examined the injury without touching. The Mercedes door hung open like a broken wing, revealing cream leather seats now stained with drops of scarlet. "We need to get you to a hospital." Ben's voice carried the steady calm of a man who had learned to function in crisis. He glanced back at the tower where his future waited behind glass doors. The interview that could save Lucy from another move, another school, another goodbye. The woman followed his gaze and something flickered across her features. "You were going somewhere important," she said. Not a question, but a statement weighted with understanding. Ben's shoulders sagged as the weight of his choice settled over him like a shroud. The emergency room smelled of antiseptic and broken dreams. Ben sat in an orange plastic chair that had seen better decades, his hands folded in his lap like a penitent. The woman had been wheeled away an hour ago, leaving him alone with the consequences of his compassion. His phone buzzed. A text from Lucy's school reminding him about the piano recital he couldn't afford to attend. Another from his landlord, each word a nail in the coffin of his hopes. The receptionist's voice cut through his thoughts like a blade. "Mr. Carter, Ms. Stone would like to see you." Rachel Stone lay propped against starched white pillows, her ankle encased in a walking boot that somehow made her look more vulnerable than authoritative. The hospital gown couldn't diminish the quiet strength that radiated from her, like heat from embers. "You stayed," she said, surprise coloring her tone like watercolor on wet paper. Ben shifted his weight, suddenly aware of his thrift store clothing in this sterile environment. "Couldn't leave you alone." The words came out rougher than he intended, carrying the weight of a man who understood abandonment too well. "Tell me about yourself, Ben Carter." Rachel's request settled between them like a challenge. He found himself speaking of Lucy, of dreams deferred, and bills that multiplied like weeds in spring rain. Of working 3 jobs that barely kept them afloat. Of a daughter who pretended not to notice when he skipped meals so she could eat. Rachel listened with an intensity that made him feel exposed, as if she could see through his carefully constructed walls to the desperate man beneath. When he finished, silence stretched between them like a bridge neither dared cross. "I have a confession." Rachel's words dropped into the quiet like stones in still water. "I was heading to that same building. Morrison Industries. We're considering an acquisition." She watched Ben's face carefully, cataloging each micro-expression like data points on a spreadsheet. "I own TechVision Corporation. This morning's meeting could have been worth $50 million. Ben's world tilted on its axis. The woman he'd helped, this stranger bleeding in a parking lot, controlled more wealth than he could comprehend. Yet here she was, speaking to him like an equal, not a charity case. The coffee shop on Main Street became their unexpected sanctuary over the following weeks. Rachel arrived each morning with newspapers tucked under her arm and questions that probed deeper than surface pleasantries. Ben learned to anticipate her laugh, a sound like silver bells that transformed her executive mask into something achingly human. She spoke of boardroom battles and hostile takeovers with the same casual tone others used for weather reports. Yet when she asked about Lucy's latest art project or Ben's dreams of opening his own garage, her attention sharpened to laser focus. "Why don't you have a family?" Ben asked one rain-soaked Thursday, the question escaping before wisdom could cage it. Rachel's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "I thought I was too busy building an empire to build a life." Her smile held the bitter edge of regret. "Turns out empires are cold places to live alone." She studied Ben's weathered hands wrapped around his mug, noting the careful way he made his coffee last, stretching every dollar like elastic. Something indefinable shifted in her chest, a recognition she couldn't quite name. Lucy's questions came like raindrops at first, then like a downpour. "Who's the lady, Dad? The one who makes you smile different?" 8-year-old wisdom cut through pretense with surgical precision. Ben found himself stumbling over explanations that didn't quite capture the truth. How could he explain that Rachel made him feel like the man he used to be, before grief and responsibility carved away everything except survival? How could he tell his daughter that for the first time since her mother died, he looked forward to tomorrow? The phone call came on a Tuesday that started like any other. "Morrison Industries," a voice crisp with professional efficiency. "Mr. Carter, we received a recommendation for your mechanical expertise. The position offers $75,000 annually with full benefits." Ben's hand trembled as he gripped the receiver. $75,000. Enough for a real apartment, piano lessons for Lucy, maybe even that garage he'd dreamed about. But the caller couldn't explain who had recommended him, leaving Ben staring at the phone with questions multiplying like shadows at dusk. Rachel's smile seemed brighter when they met that afternoon, though she claimed it was just good news about a potential merger. Ben shared his unexpected fortune, watching her face for clues he couldn't name. "You deserve this," she said, her voice carrying conviction that made him believe for a moment that the universe might actually be fair. They walked through Riverside Park where autumn painted the world in shades of farewell. Children played on swings that squeaked in rhythms older than their parents' dreams. "I want you to meet Lucy," Ben said, surprising himself with the words. Rachel stopped walking, her hand flying to her throat in an unconscious gesture of vulnerability. "I don't think that's wise." The words tumbled out too quickly, carrying undertones of panic that Ben couldn't decipher. "I'm not good with children. I wouldn't want to disappoint her." But her eyes told a different story, speaking of longings she couldn't voice and fears she couldn't face. Ben nodded, pretending her rejection didn't sting like salt in a wound. The new job at Morrison Industries felt like stepping into someone else's life. Clean uniforms, modern equipment, colleagues who treated him like a professional rather than a charity case. Ben threw himself into the work with desperate gratitude, fixing machines with the same tender care he'd once given his wife's garden. His supervisor, a man named Patterson, with kind eyes and permanent grease under his fingernails, spoke of Ben's mysterious benefactor. "Someone high up the food chain specifically requested you. Don't know who, but they've got faith in your abilities." Lucy's excitement over their new apartment filled Ben with a warmth he'd almost forgotten. She claimed the smallest bedroom, immediately transforming it into a fortress of stuffed animals and colored drawings. "Can we invite Rachel for dinner?" she asked, arranging her art supplies with the precision of a general deploying troops. "I want to show her my butterfly project." Ben's heart clenched at the hope in her voice. How could he explain that sometimes adults built walls higher than children could climb? The text message arrived during Lucy's first piano lesson, paid for with his Morrison Industries paycheck. Need to see you. It's important. Ah. Ben found Rachel in the coffee shop, but she seemed different somehow. Nervous energy radiated from her like heat waves, and her hands shook slightly as she stirred sugar into coffee, already sweet enough to satisfy a hummingbird. I'm leaving Cedar Falls, she said without preamble. My work here is finished. The words hit Ben like physical blows, each one stealing breath he couldn't spare. When? His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, hollow as an empty church. Soon. Tonight, actually. Rachel couldn't meet his eyes, focusing instead on the swirling patterns in her coffee cup as if they held secrets worth guarding. This was always temporary, Ben. I told you that. But she hadn't told him that temporary could feel like forever, or that leaving could hurt worse than staying ever had. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against worn linoleum like fingernails on a chalkboard. Ben watched her walk away through rain-streaked windows, each step taking her further from the life they'd almost built together. He sat alone among the familiar chaos of evening rush, surrounded by couples sharing desserts and families arguing over homework. The coffee shop suddenly felt cavernous, its warm lighting harsh as interrogation lamps. His phone buzzed with a message from Lucy's piano teacher. She's gifted. With proper instruction, she could go far. Another dream that required money he was just beginning to have. Friday brought the accident that changed everything. Lucy's bike skidded on wet leaves outside the school, sending her tumbling onto concrete that showed no mercy to 8-year-old knees and elbows. The call from the nurse sent Ben racing through traffic lights that blurred like watercolors in rain. He found Lucy in the principal's office, brave as a soldier, but with tears tracking silver paths down dirt-streaked cheeks. It doesn't hurt too much, Daddy, she lied with the selflessness that broke his heart daily. The emergency room brought unwelcome déjà vu, the same orange chairs and antiseptic smell that had witnessed his first meeting with Rachel. Lucy charmed the nurses with knock-knock jokes while they cleaned her wounds, her resilience a stark reminder of how much she'd inherited from her mother. The bill arrived before they'd even left the building, a sum that would devour Ben's savings like fire through paper. He stared at the numbers until they blurred, calculating which dreams he'd have to sacrifice this time. Excuse me, Mr. Carter. The billing clerk's voice cut through his mental mathematics. Your daughter's account has been paid in full. Ben's head snapped up, confusion written across his features like graffiti on a clean wall. By whom? The woman consulted her computer screen with practiced efficiency. Anonymous benefactor. Happens more often than you'd think. She handed him a white envelope that seemed to burn his fingers. Inside, an address written in handwriting he recognized, and a note. If you want the truth. Ah. The 30-story tower looked different in evening light, its glass surface reflecting the dying sun like mirrors in a funhouse. Ben's footsteps echoed in the marble lobby as he approached elevators that whispered secrets in languages he couldn't understand. The 30th floor stretched before him like a challenge, all polished surfaces and muted lighting designed to intimidate. The nameplate on the corner office read, Rachel Stone, Chief Executive Officer, Tech Vision Corporation. In letters that might as well have been written in fire. Rachel sat behind a mahogany desk larger than Ben's entire living room, transformed from the vulnerable woman he'd held in hospital waiting rooms into something corporate and untouchable. Her suit cost more than his monthly salary, her hair pulled back in a style that spoke of board meetings and billion-dollar decisions. Hello, Ben. Her voice carried new weight, authority that settled around her like armor. The view from her windows encompassed the entire city, making Ben feel suddenly, devastatingly small. You're her. The CEO. The words fell from his lips like stones down a well. Rachel nodded, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the woman beneath the executive mask. I came to Cedar Falls to evaluate Morrison Industries for acquisition. The morning we met, I was rushing to a meeting that would have sealed a $50 million deal. She stood, moving to the windows where city lights twinkled like earthbound stars. You saved me from more than just physical injury, Ben. You reminded me what it felt like to be human. The job. Lucy's hospital bill. It was all you. Ben's voice carried the weight of betrayal, each word carefully measured and found wanting. Rachel turned from the windows, her reflection ghost-like against the darkening sky. I wanted to help. You deserved a chance. But her explanations felt hollow as empty promises, unable to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. Is that what I am to you? A project? Some kind of charity case to ease your corporate guilt? No! The word exploded from Rachel with enough force to rattle the windows. You're the first person who ever saw me as just Rachel. Not a stock portfolio, or a networking opportunity, or a strategic alliance. Just a woman who needed help. Tears traced silver paths down cheeks accustomed to boardroom poker faces. I fell in love with the man who gave up everything to help a stranger, but I destroyed us by trying to give you everything in return. The silence that followed stretched between them like an ocean too wide to cross. Ben stared at this woman who had orchestrated his salvation and his heartbreak with equal precision. Lucy asks about you every day, he said finally. She wanted to show you her butterfly project. She thinks you don't like children. His words landed like physical blows, each one finding their mark in Rachel's carefully constructed defenses. Maybe it's better this way. Clean breaks hurt less than slow bleeds. Ben walked away from 50 floors of power and possibility, leaving Rachel alone with the empire she'd built and the love she'd lost. The elevator carried him down through layers of ambition and compromise, depositing him in a lobby that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. Outside, Cedar Falls spread before him like a promise he was no longer sure he wanted to keep. His phone buzzed with a text from Lucy. Is Rachel coming to dinner Sunday? I made her a card. The resignation letter took Ben 3 attempts to write, each draft carrying different shades of disappointment and wounded pride. He delivered it personally to Patterson, whose weathered face creased with genuine concern. You sure about this, son? Best mechanic we've had in 20 years. But Ben couldn't explain how success tasted like betrayal when it came wrapped in pity. He cleaned out his toolbox with methodical precision, each wrench and socket carrying memories of briefly believing in second chances. Lucy took the news of their return to the old apartment with 8-year-old stoicism that made Ben's chest tighten with pride and guilt in equal measure. She packed her art supplies without complaint, though he caught her staring wistfully at the piano keyboard she'd barely had time to learn. Will we see Rachel before she leaves? Lucy asked, her voice carefully neutral in the way children mastered when protecting adult feelings. I don't think so, baby. Sometimes grown-ups have to say goodbye differently. The garage job Ben found paid half his Morrison salary, but it came without strings attached or mysterious benefactors. He worked on cars that limped in with problems that reminded him of his own life, broken down, patched together, running on fumes and prayers. His new co-workers accepted him without questions, sharing coffee black as motor oil and stories that never quite revealed their deeper truths. The work felt honest in a way that Morrison's clean efficiency never had. Weeks passed like seasons in time-lapse photography. Ben learned to stop looking for Rachel's face in coffee shop crowds and city park benches. Lucy asked fewer questions about her absent friend, though she still drew pictures of 3 stick figures holding hands under crayon suns. The old apartment welcomed them back with familiar creaks and water stains that looked like abstract art if you squinted hard enough. Life settled into rhythms of survival that Ben recognized like old songs. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday that tasted of approaching winter. No return address, but Ben recognized the expensive paper stock and precise handwriting that belonged to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. Inside, a single sheet that might as well have been written in lightning. Lucy's Dreams Fund. Congratulations! Your daughter has been selected to receive a full academic and artistic scholarship. Ben read the letter 3 times before the words penetrated the fog of his disbelief. Lucy's reaction painted the apartment in shades of joy Ben had almost forgotten existed. She danced around their tiny living room, clutching the scholarship letter like a golden ticket to worlds beyond their reach. "Lucy's Dreams Fund, Daddy! They named it after me!" Her innocent excitement pierced Ben's heart with recognition. Only one person knew about Lucy's artistic ambitions and their financial impossibility. Only one person had the power to turn dreams into reality with a stroke of her pen. The piano lessons resumed the following week, Lucy's small fingers finding melodies that transformed their cramped apartment into a concert hall. Ben sat in the garage's break room during her lesson times, listening to other parents discuss recitals and competitions with casual optimism that money couldn't buy. His daughter's talent bloomed under proper instruction like flowers after drought, each note a reminder of gifts that deserved better soil than poverty could provide. Months dissolved into seasons that carried no word from Rachel Stone. The fund continued its mysterious work, helping dozens of children throughout Cedar Falls pursue dreams their families couldn't afford. Local newspapers ran features about the anonymous benefactor, speculating about motives and identities with the hungry curiosity of small-town journalists. Ben read every article, searching for clues to the woman who had loved him enough to let him go. Lucy's first recital arrived with spring's early warmth, filling the community center with proud parents and nervous children. She played Chopin with the confidence of someone who had found her calling, each note crystal clear in the hushed auditorium. Ben watched from the back row, his heart swelling with pride, too large for his chest to contain. As the applause faded, Lucy searched the crowd with 8-year-old hope, looking for a familiar face that would never appear. The garage promoted Ben to assistant manager, a title that came with marginally better pay and significantly more responsibility. He supervised younger mechanics who reminded him of his former self, full of dreams that hadn't yet learned the weight of reality. His hands grew more skilled with each passing month, fixing problems that others had deemed hopeless. Word of his abilities spread through Cedar Falls like wildfire, bringing customers who specifically requested the quiet man who could resurrect their dying vehicles. Summer brought news that shifted the town's landscape like an earthquake. Morrison Industries announced a massive expansion, creating hundreds of jobs and transforming Cedar Falls from sleepy suburb to thriving commercial center. The local paper attributed the decision to a comprehensive economic development study commissioned by an anonymous corporate sponsor. Ben read the article twice, recognizing the invisible hand that continued to shape their community's destiny from somewhere far beyond their borders. Lucy turned 9 with a birthday party that filled their small apartment with the chaotic joy of childhood friendships. Her artistic talents had evolved beyond butterflies and stick figures into portraits that captured emotions Ben couldn't name. She drew pictures of their family with an empty space carefully outlined but never filled, as if waiting for someone who might never return. "It's for Rachel," she explained matter-of-factly, "in case she ever wants to be in our family picture." The letter arrived on Lucy's birthday, mixed among cards from relatives and party invitations from classmates. Expensive stationery that smelled faintly of perfume Ben remembered from hospital waiting rooms and coffee shop conversations. For Lucy, on her special day. The envelope read in handwriting that made Ben's chest tighten with familiar longing. Inside, a music box that played Chopin. When Wound, its melody identical to the piece Lucy had mastered for her first recital. She remembered. Lucy whispered, cradling the music box like a treasure beyond price. Ben watched his daughter's face illuminate with joy that had nothing to do with monetary value and everything to do with being remembered by someone who mattered. The gift came with no note, no return address, no promise of future contact. just a melody that would play in their apartment whenever Lucy needed to remember that somewhere in the world, someone cared about her dreams. Years compressed into moments of growth and change that transformed Lucy from child to young woman with talents that outgrew Cedar Falls, like clothes outgrown overnight. Her scholarship expanded to include summer programs and advanced instruction, opportunities that opened doors Ben had never imagined possible. She spoke of music conservatories and international competitions with casual confidence that made his heart ache with pride and impending loss. Ben's garage flourished into a legitimate business that employed 6 mechanics and served customers from 3 counties. He never advertised, relying instead on word-of-mouth recommendations that spread like ripples in still water. His reputation for fixing the unfixable brought him cars that others had abandoned, vehicles that limped to his door with problems that seemed impossible until his hands worked their quiet magic. Success tasted different when earned through honest sweat rather than mysterious benefactors. The newspaper article appeared on a spring morning that smelled of rain and new beginnings. "Local Scholarship Fund expands nationwide," the headline proclaimed above a story detailing the Lucy's Dreams Fund's growth into a multi-million-dollar foundation serving thousands of children. The article mentioned the fund's anonymous founder only in passing, describing a corporate executive who preferred to let actions speak louder than names. Ben clipped the article carefully, adding it to a collection he pretended not to keep. Lucy's acceptance to Juilliard arrived with summer's heat, the thick envelope containing dreams made manifest through talent and mysterious benefactors working in harmony. She read the letter aloud while Ben pretended to work on an engine that suddenly required intense concentration. His daughter was leaving Cedar Falls for Manhattan's bright lights and infinite possibilities, following paths that would lead her far beyond his ability to protect or provide. "The fund will cover everything," Lucy said, her voice carrying wonder that 18 years hadn't diminished. Tuition, room and board, even spending money for concerts and cultural events. She paused, studying her father's carefully neutral expression. "Dad, do you think Rachel knows? About Juilliard, I mean. Do you think she's proud of me?" Ben's hands stilled on the wrench, his throat closing around words that carried 18 years of complicated love. The farewell dinner Ben couldn't quite afford filled their apartment with friends and neighbors who had watched Lucy grow from shy 8-year-old to accomplished young woman. Patterson attended with his wife, sharing stories about Ben's mechanical genius that made his boss blush like a schoolboy. Lucy's piano teacher spoke of natural talent enhanced by determination, predicting success that would echo far beyond concert halls. The evening felt like closing a chapter in a book Ben wasn't ready to finish reading. Lucy's departure loomed like weather on the horizon, inevitable and life-changing. Ben helped her pack belongings that seemed insufficient for the journey she was beginning, adding practical items to bags full of sheet music and artistic dreams. "Will you be okay without me?" she asked, displaying wisdom that reminded him painfully of her mother. "Will you be lonely?" He kissed her forehead, tasting salt from tears he refused to shed. "I'll be proud. That's better than okay." The morning Lucy left for New York dawned gray and humid, matching Ben's internal weather perfectly. He drove her to the airport through traffic that seemed determined to delay their goodbye, neither speaking about the enormity of the moment. At the departure gate, she hugged him with 18-year-old strength that couldn't quite hide her own tears. "Thank Rachel for me," she whispered. "Somehow, someday, tell her I said thank you." Then she walked through security into a future Ben had helped build, but couldn't share. The empty apartment echoed with absence that filled every corner like forgotten music. Ben sat in Lucy's abandoned room, surrounded by childhood artifacts she'd left behind like breadcrumbs marking paths through innocence. The music box from Rachel sat silent on the dresser, its melody locked inside until someone remembered to wind its spring. He touched the key gently, releasing Chopin into air that suddenly tasted of memory and regret. Months passed with postcards from Manhattan that spoke of classes and concerts, new friends, and incredible opportunities. Lucy's letters grew longer and more sophisticated, describing a world of artistic intensity that Ben could only imagine. She mentioned her mysterious benefactor occasionally, wondering about the person who had transformed her life through anonymous generosity. "I wish I could thank her properly," she wrote. "I wish you could both know how happy you've made me." The phone call came on a Tuesday that started like any other, carrying news that stopped time itself. Lucy had been selected for a European tour with Juilliard's most elite ensemble, performing in concert halls where history's greatest musicians had once stood. "Dad, can you believe it? Prague, Vienna, London. The Lucy's Dreams Fund is sponsoring the entire trip." Her excitement transmitted through fiber optic cables like electricity, lighting up Ben's workshop with second-hand joy. Ben closed the garage early that day, driving to the overlook where he'd once brought Lucy to watch sunset paint Cedar Falls in shades of gold and promise. The town spread below him like a map of memories, each street carrying stories of struggle and survival, love found and lost. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "She's extraordinary. You should be proud. A friend." Ben stared at the message until the screen dimmed, recognizing the careful distance in words that carried infinite tenderness. The years that followed brought changes that transformed both Ben and Cedar Falls in ways neither had expected. His garage expanded into a full-service automotive center that attracted customers from hundreds of miles away, drawn by his reputation for miraculous resurrections of mechanical hopelessness. He hired young mechanics hungry for knowledge, teaching them that tools were only as good as the hands that held them and the heart that guided them. Lucy's career blossomed like flowers in perfect soil, her performances earning reviews that compared her to masters twice her age. She sent recordings of concerts from venues Ben recognized from movies, her music filling his apartment with beauty that transcended distance and time. Local newspapers covered her successes with hometown pride, never mentioning the mysterious fund that had made her journey possible. Ben kept every clipping, creating a scrapbook of dreams fulfilled through invisible generosity. The letter arrived on Lucy's 21st birthday, delivered by courier to Ben's garage, with instructions that it be opened immediately. Inside, an invitation written on paper so elegant it seemed to glow with its own light. "You are cordially invited to attend the inaugural Lucy's Dreams Fund Gala, celebrating 5 years of supporting young artists nationwide." The venue was Manhattan's most prestigious hotel. The date coincided perfectly with Lucy's birthday concert at Carnegie Hall. Ben stared at the invitation until its words blurred into abstract patterns that meant everything and nothing. He hadn't seen Rachel in nearly 3 years, hadn't heard her voice or felt her presence, except in the mysterious workings of her foundation. The thought of facing her again sent electricity through his nervous system like touching live wires. But Lucy would be performing. Lucy, who still asked about Rachel in every phone call, still wondered about the woman who had changed their lives. The flight to New York felt like traveling to another planet, the aircraft carrying Ben over landscapes that meant nothing compared to the emotional territory he was crossing. Lucy met him at the airport, transformed from the small-town girl who had left Cedar Falls into a sophisticated young woman who moved through crowds with elegant confidence. "Dad!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him with unchanged affection. "I can't believe you're finally here." Carnegie Hall rose before them like a cathedral dedicated to musical worship, its facade promising acoustic perfection that would showcase Lucy's talents to their fullest advantage. Ben sat in the audience, surrounded by music lovers who spoke in languages he couldn't understand, their appreciation transcending words anyway. When Lucy appeared on stage, her piano gleaming under lights that transformed her into something ethereal, Ben's heart stopped completely. She played as if channeling the universe's own music, each note perfect yet somehow spontaneous, technical mastery enhanced by emotional truth that brought tears to sophisticated eyes. The audience responded with applause that shook the hall's historic rafters, a sound Ben felt in his bones like thunder. Lucy found his face in the crowd and smiled, sharing a moment of pure connection across the distance between stage and seats. The gala afterward transformed the hotel's ballroom into something from fairy tales, crystal and candlelight, creating atmosphere that made everyone more beautiful than reality allowed. Ben felt underdressed despite his new suit, overwhelmed by sophistication that reminded him how far he'd traveled from his natural habitat. Then he saw her. Rachel stood near the windows overlooking Central Park, wearing midnight blue that made her seem part of the elegant darkness outside. She turned as if sensing his presence, their eyes meeting across a crowded room like something from movies Ben didn't usually watch. Time compressed and expanded simultaneously, years of separation dissolving in seconds of recognition. She looked older, more refined, success having carved new lines around eyes that remained achingly familiar. Her smile carried uncertainty that reminded him of the vulnerable woman he'd helped in a hospital parking lot. "Hello, Ben." Her voice carried the same musical quality he'd never forgotten, though it now held notes of professional confidence that hadn't existed in Cedar Falls. "I wasn't sure you'd come." They stood apart in the crowd's chaos. Two people surrounded by hundreds, yet isolated in their bubble of shared history. Other guests swirled around them like water around stones, leaving them untouched by the gala's manufactured celebration. "Lucy doesn't know you're here," Ben said, the words carrying questions he couldn't quite articulate. Rachel nodded, her composure perfect except for hands that trembled slightly as she adjusted her purse strap. "I wanted to see her perform, to see what we accomplished together." The word "we" hung between them like a bridge neither dared cross, loaded with implications that could change everything or nothing. Lucy appeared beside them like a vision in white silk, her post-performance glow making her seem lit from within. "Rachel!" she exclaimed, the name carrying years of wondering and hoping. "You came! You're really here!" She launched herself into Rachel's arms with 21-year-old enthusiasm, the embrace lasting long enough for both women to remember what they'd been missing. "I've wanted to thank you for so long," Lucy said, pulling back to study Rachel's face with artist's intensity. "The fund, the opportunities, the music box. You gave me everything I needed to become who I am." Rachel's composure finally cracked, tears tracing silver paths down cheeks that had forgotten how to be vulnerable. "You gave yourself wings, Lucy. I just provided the wind." The three of them found a quiet corner where conversation could flow without interruption, years of separation bridged by Lucy's infectious joy and innocent questions. Rachel spoke of her company's expansion, the foundation's growth, the satisfaction of seeing dreams realized through anonymous generosity. Ben listened to her voice like music he'd forgotten he loved, noting changes that success and time had wrought in the woman who'd changed his life. "I have something for you," Rachel said, reaching into her purse with hands that shook slightly. She produced a small velvet box that made Lucy gasp and Ben's heart race with implications he couldn't name. "It belonged to my grandmother. She was a pianist too, though she never had Lucy's opportunities." Inside the box nestled a ring set with emeralds that caught the candlelight and threw it back in fractured rainbows. "I can't accept this," Lucy protested, though her eyes couldn't leave the ring's mesmerizing beauty. "It's too valuable, too important." Rachel took the ring from its velvet nest, her movements carrying ceremony that transformed the gesture into something sacred. "My grandmother would want it to belong to someone who understands music's power to transform lives, someone who uses her gift to make the world more beautiful." Ben watched the exchange with emotions that threatened to overwhelm his carefully constructed defenses. Rachel wasn't just giving Lucy jewelry, She was passing on legacy, family history, connection that transcended blood relationships. The gesture spoke of love that had never died, only hidden itself behind anonymous generosity and careful distance. Lucy slipped the ring onto her finger with reverent care, its emeralds catching light like captured starfire. The evening wound down with promises to stay in touch that carried weight of genuine intention rather than polite convention. Lucy hugged Rachel goodbye with the fierce affection of someone who had finally found a missing piece of herself, while Ben and Rachel exchanged glances that spoke volumes neither dared voice aloud. "Thank you," Ben said simply, the words inadequate for everything he meant. For all of it. "Thank you for letting me love her from a distance," Rachel replied, her voice barely audible above the gala's diminishing noise. "She's everything I hoped she would become." They stood in the hotel lobby's marble grandeur, three people connected by love that had taken unexpected forms but never diminished in strength. Tomorrow would bring departure and distance, but tonight held perfect understanding that some gifts transcend conventional expression. Ben returned to Cedar Falls with memories that glowed like embers in his chest, and a perspective shifted by seeing his daughter's success through Rachel's eyes. The garage welcomed him back with familiar smells of motor oil and honest work, but everything felt different somehow. Lucy called daily with updates about tours and recordings, her voice carrying happiness that made his sacrifices feel worthwhile. She mentioned Rachel occasionally, their relationship now openly acknowledged and carefully nurtured. Years passed with seasonal regularity that marked time's passage without diminishing love's constancy. Lucy's career soared to heights that brought her international recognition, her name appearing on programs alongside musicians Ben had only heard on classical radio stations. The Lucy's Dreams Fund expanded globally, supporting young artists whose talents might otherwise remain buried beneath circumstance and poverty. Rachel's anonymous generosity became legendary in philanthropic circles, though her identity remained carefully guarded. Ben's garage evolved into an institution that served as community gathering place as much as automotive repair facility. Young people sought his guidance on matters mechanical and personal, drawn by reputation for quiet wisdom and hands that could fix anything broken. He never married again, though several women attempted to breach the walls around his heart. Part of him remained forever grateful to a woman who had loved him enough to set him free. Lucy's wedding invitation arrived with spring's first warmth, announcing her engagement to a fellow musician she'd met during a European tour. The ceremony would take place in Manhattan's most beautiful church, with reception at the same hotel where she'd reunited with Rachel 5 years earlier. Ben read the invitation 3 times, his chest swelling with pride that threatened to crack his ribs. His daughter had found love that complemented her music, creating harmony in life as well as art. The wedding day dawned perfect as movie scenes, clear skies and gentle breeze that seemed choreographed for maximum romance. Ben walked Lucy down the aisle, wearing his best suit and proudest smile, delivering her to a young man whose eyes reflected the same awe Ben had felt watching her first piano lesson. The ceremony blended traditional vows with musical interludes that transformed the church into concert hall, Lucy's talent blessing her own union. At the reception, Ben found Rachel seated at a corner table, wearing sage green that made her eyes luminous in the candlelight. She'd aged gracefully, success having softened some of her sharper edges while enhancing her natural elegance. "She's beautiful," Rachel said, watching Lucy dance with her new husband. "They look like they were made for each other." Ben nodded, remembering another wedding 24 years earlier, another bride who had danced with similar joy. "I never thanked you properly," Ben said, surprising himself with the admission. "For everything. The job, the fund, letting me find my own way." Rachel's smile held sadness and satisfaction in equal measure, a woman who had learned that some forms of love required letting go. "You thanked me by raising an extraordinary daughter," by becoming the man she needed you to be. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Lucy's happiness illuminate the entire ballroom. The evening concluded with toasts that made everyone cry and laughter that made everyone forget their tears. Lucy sought out Ben and Rachel simultaneously, pulling them into a group hug that lasted until other guests began to stare. "My two favorite people," she announced, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "The ones who taught me that love comes in many forms, all of them beautiful." Ben felt Rachel's hand brush his during the embrace, contact lasting milliseconds, but carrying years of unspoken understanding. They parted again that night with greater peace than their previous separations had offered. Rachel returned to her corporate empire with renewed purpose, channeling maternal instincts she'd never expected to possess into philanthropic work that changed thousands of lives. Ben went back to Cedar Falls and his garage, carrying memories of his daughter's perfect day and the woman whose love had made it possible. Their story might not have ended with traditional romance, but it had created something more valuable, a legacy of dreams fulfilled and love expressed through sacrifice. Lucy's success continued expanding like ripples in still water, her music reaching audiences worldwide, while her foundation work honored the anonymous benefactor who had launched her career. She never learned Rachel's full story, accepting the official explanation that a wealthy patron preferred privacy to publicity. Ben kept Rachel's secret as carefully as he'd kept his own love, understanding that some truths were too precious for casual revelation. The phone call came on a spring morning that smelled of rain and new beginnings, Lucy's voice bright with excitement that transmitted through fiber optic cables like sunshine. "Dad, I'm pregnant!" The announcement hit Ben like lightning, transforming him instantly from father to grandfather-elect. "The baby's due in October. We're over the moon." Ben sat in his office chair, surrounded by familiar chaos of invoices and repair orders, feeling his world expand to accommodate new love he hadn't expected. Rachel's congratulations arrived by handwritten note on stationery that smelled faintly of the perfume he remembered from hospital waiting rooms. "Congratulations on becoming a grandfather," she wrote. "Lucy will be an extraordinary mother, having learned from an extraordinary father. The next generation of dreamers is blessed to have your family's love." The note bore no return address, but Ben knew she was watching from whatever distance she'd chosen, sharing their joy even if she couldn't share their presence. Lucy's son arrived with autumn's first chill, a perfect baby boy with his mother's musical fingers and his grandfather's steady gaze. Ben held his grandson for the first time in the hospital room where Lucy had been born 25 years earlier, feeling time's circular nature in the weight of new life. "His name is Benjamin," Lucy announced, her voice soft with exhaustion and overwhelming love. "Benjamin Carter Morrison, after his grandfather and the company that gave us our start." The baby's christening brought together family and friends who filled the small church with celebration that echoed off rafters accustomed to quieter worship. Ben stood as godfather, promising to guide young Benjamin through life's challenges with the same steady love he'd given Lucy. Among the congregation, he spotted a familiar figure in the back pew, elegant woman wearing navy blue, who slipped away before the service ended. But her presence had been noted, her blessing silently bestowed on the newest member of their unconventional family. Years compressed into moments of growth and change that transformed Benjamin from infant to toddler with his mother's intelligence and his grandfather's quiet strength. Lucy balanced motherhood with career, her music now carrying deeper emotional resonance that audiences recognized even if they couldn't name its source. The Lucy's Dreams Fund continued its work, supporting young artists whose talents might otherwise remain buried beneath circumstance and limited resources. Ben's garage became Benjamin's second home, the little boy learning to walk among tool benches and hydraulic lifts that made ordinary childhood seem tame by comparison. He showed early aptitude for understanding how things worked, taking apart toys with systematic precision that reminded Ben of his own childhood fascination with mechanical mysteries. "He's got the family gift," Ben told Lucy, watching Benjamin arrange blocks with engineering precision that defied his age. The invitation arrived on Benjamin's 3rd birthday, delivered by courier with instructions that it be opened privately. Inside, elegant script announced Rachel's retirement from active corporate leadership, her decision to focus full-time on philanthropic work that had become her true passion. A handwritten note accompanied the formal announcement. "I'm finally free to love openly instead of anonymously. Would you and Benjamin like to meet for coffee sometime? I promise I'm much better with children than I used to be." Ben stared at the invitation until its words blurred into possibilities he'd stopped allowing himself to imagine. 3 years was long enough for wounds to heal, for pride to soften, for love to find new forms of expression. He thought of Lucy's happiness, Benjamin's innocent curiosity, and his own heart that had never quite learned to stop hoping. Perhaps some stories deserved second acts, different endings than their authors had originally planned. The coffee shop had changed ownership twice since Ben's last meeting with Rachel, but its atmosphere remained warmly familiar. She arrived precisely on time, elegant as always, but with softer edges that success had carved away. Benjamin clung shyly to Ben's leg until Rachel knelt to his level, producing a small music box that played the same Chopin melody Lucy had mastered years earlier. "For you, Benjamin," she said gently. "Music makes everything more beautiful." They talked for hours while Benjamin played with his new treasure, their conversation flowing with ease that surprised them both. Rachel spoke of her retirement, her plans to travel and support artists personally rather than anonymously. Ben shared stories of Benjamin's precocious intelligence, Lucy's continued success, and his own contentment with life's unexpected directions. Neither mentioned love directly, but it colored every exchange like sunlight through stained glass. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" Rachel asked as they prepared to leave, her invitation carrying weight of genuine possibility rather than polite courtesy. "I know a place that serves excellent pasta and tolerates small children remarkably well." Benjamin tugged on her sleeve, offering his music box for her inspection with 3-year-old generosity that made both adults smile. "I think that would be very nice," Ben replied, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Their first official date in 5 years took place at an Italian restaurant that welcomed families with noisy enthusiasm and authentic cuisine. Benjamin charmed the waitstaff with attempts at pronouncing spaghetti, while Rachel and Ben rediscovered conversation that flowed like wine between old friends. They discussed everything except the years of separation, focusing instead on present possibilities and future dreams that might include shared experiences. The evening concluded with Benjamin falling asleep in his car seat during the drive home, exhausted by excitement and new experiences. Rachel walked them to Ben's front door, her presence feeling natural in ways that surprised them both. "Thank you for tonight," she said, her voice carrying notes of wonder that reminded Ben of the vulnerable woman he'd first helped in a hospital parking lot. "I'd forgotten how good it feels to be part of a family, even temporarily." "It doesn't have to be temporary," Ben replied, the words escaping before caution could cage them. Rachel's smile could have powered the streetlights, brilliant enough to illuminate possibilities they'd both thought permanently lost. "I'd like that very much," she whispered, then kissed his cheek with tenderness that promised new chapters in stories they'd thought were finished. Sometimes love learned patience through separation, returning stronger for having survived the test of time and distance. The music box played its familiar melody in Benjamin's nursery, Chopin's notes drifting through the house like promises of harmony to come. Outside, Cedar Falls slept under stars that had witnessed love stories throughout history, their light blessing new beginnings that grew from old endings. In the morning, Lucy would call with news of her latest concert, her voice bright with happiness that included everyone she loved. But tonight belonged to quiet hope and second chances, to the understanding that some gifts take years to unwrap completely.